yours. Yankee Doodle Dandy? All right, soldier, right here next to the drummer. Come on. Ready? Ready, Gabe? 1, 2, ready, go. I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy. I'm a Yankee Doodle boy. La 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 la. Ba, ba, ba.
Event that we've been planning for at least a year. We're here and gathered today because we want to bring attention to our World War I War Memorial. So we're having a 1917 themed garden party. And I just want to say a quick thank you as we start to the Campwoods Planning Committee, to the Campwoods Board, ACLA, for all the help, and all our community members for coming out today. And over there, our sponsors, Can I tell you how excited to have here at Campwoods on our front lawn the trifecta of good stuff. We have Walter's food truck. We have Blue Pig ice cream. Yeah! They have the corn and blueberry. And we have our friend Scott from 6 Degrees of Separation. We have a couple of politicians, but we're going to get to that in a minute. But the highlight of the program of the moment is our village historian, Dana White.
Hi. Take it away, Dana. So this is a really kind of amazing structure, and I'm glad that I learned more about it. It's just the people on it are really quite interesting. So on April 2nd, 1917, the United States entered World War I and turned the tide of the war, leading the Allies to victory over Germany. 4 million Americans fought in the Great War. 200,000 were wounded, and more than 100,000 lost their lives, all in the space of a mere 19 months. In the years that followed, communities and groups around the nation erected public and private memorials to those who served and died. There are an estimated 10,000 such memorials around the country, including this one at Campwoods grounds. During World War I, Campwoods was still primarily a summer community for religious meetings for Methodists from New York City. With one exception, the 14 men and one woman, the 13 men and one woman, on this honor roll are not from Ossining, but from New York City, predominantly Brooklyn. Some are the children of Swedish immigrants who came here in the mid-19th century and began to hold their own Methodist meetings at Campwoods in 1854. We don't know who designed this honor roll style memorial. It may have been ordered from a catalog or commissioned privately. It seems to be made from some kind of cast concrete. The classical columns and the eagle are familiar motifs for these memorials. As you can see, there were at one time 2 eagles. All that's left of this one are its claws. I think we need another eagle, don't you? Yes, we do. Yeah. And here we see the inscription. It's a little hard to read. Somebody at some point tried to make it more legible by painting the letters, bless them. So the inscription here reads, 1917-1919, this memorial was erected by the Men's Club and the Ladies' Circle. I imagine those were some sort of Methodist hierarchy. In grateful appreciation to members and sons, and one daughter, who answered their country's call to preserve democracy, obliterate plutocracy, and pass to all mankind freedom and liberty. Now that is an unusual turn of phrase, obliterate plutocracy. Somebody probably sat up all night writing that. So there was somebody, obliterating plutocracy was somebody's pet clause. Now as far as I can find, all these Campwoods members survived the war. We can piece together their stories using online resources and the Ossining Historical Society Museum. Starting at the top, United States Army. And it's interesting as we go down, let's see if we can figure out why they're ordered the way they are. They're not in alphabetical order, they're in a different kind of order, okay? Harry Albert Hyatt was born in 1888. He worked in the carting business. That means he probably drove a horse-drawn van or maybe an early automobile van. He and his younger brother, Private Walter Hyatt, lived on Hancock Street in Brooklyn. Harry went into the Army first. He was older. In 1917, he spent 2 years on the Western Front with the 501st Engineers. Walter took machine gun training at Fort Hancock, Georgia, but by the time he arrived overseas in October of 1918, the war was almost over. The peace treaty with Germany wasn't signed until June of 1919, so like many servicemen, Harry stayed through that year. That's why it's 1917, 1919. That was the full 2-year course of our involvement in less than 3 years in this conflict. It used to be get in and get out, right? That was the way it used to be. Okay. So Harry stayed through the year abroad, and what he did was he worked for the U.S. Army Postal Express Service, the first all-military mail service in American history until he was discharged. Army Sergeant Martin Schweikert fought the Germans on the Western Front with Squadron A, a National Guard cavalry unit, which meant, what does that mean, kids? What's cavalry mean?
Horses.
They rode horses. Let's not forget, World War I, they had a lot of cavalry units. There's actually a Broadway play about that.
That was great. That's great.
What was it called? War Horse. Okay, that was about a World War I cavalry horse, right? So he was with the 101st Streitkar with the 105th Infantry Regiment. These troops played an important role in smashing through a major German defensive position called the Hindenburg Line. Henry Oehlenschläger, his name is misspelled, but we won't hold that against him, was born in Brooklyn to German immigrants. He met his future wife, Louise Schweikert, at Campwoods, who happened to be Martin Schweikert's older sister. That happened a lot here. I think you came as much to meet your future spouse as to, you know, pray and run around and yell in the woods. Yeah, you didn't. This was eHarmony, but eCampwoods.com. Henry and Louise married right after Henry joined the Army in 1918. On his draft form, he claimed religious objections to the war. Maybe that's why he served as a bugler at Camp Greenleaf, a medical officer training camp in Georgia. Now these two, Sergeant C. Russell Keeler and C.K. Granger, I could not find anything about them. All right, they faded into the mists of time. Corporal Carlton Granger Udell was from Brooklyn on October 20th, 1918. He sailed for France aboard the USS Agapennar with a Signal Corps unit, providing communication and information from the field. The war ended 3 weeks later on November 11th, 1918, but Udell remained abroad until June of 1919. He ultimately moved to Ossining after the war. So did Army mechanic Alfred Rudolph Benson. His parents were Swedish immigrants. Benson served overseas in a support role. By 1922, he was living on Stone Avenue and working as a contractor. When Herbert Charles Briggs enlisted in June of 1917, he was 25 years old and a salesman for the Hammacher Schlemmer Company. They have a fascinating history. Then a hardware store at 4th Avenue and 13th Street in Manhattan. Briggs deployed with the 102nd Field Signal Battalion in 1917, and when the war ended, he was with the 1st Battalion Signal Corps. After the war, he returned to selling hardware. Private Harry Vanderbilt is the only Ossining native on this list of names. He was born in 1888 to Nellie Birdsall and John Vanderbilt, the village's first mail carrier. They lived on Pine Bridge Road. You'll notice the people who are from Ossining, they lived right around here to be close to Campwoods. They lived on Pine Bridge Road. Harry left school in the 8th grade and joined the Army in 1914 in California. He joined the 64th Infantry Regiment as part of the Army's 7th Division fighting in France. He was 35 years old by the time he married to a German woman named Gertrude. He became a village policeman here in Ossining. He died in 1962 and is buried in Sparta Cemetery. You can find it's very easy to find him in Gertrude's headstone. I love doing that. You should join the Ossining Historic Cemetery Conservancy. It's unbelievable. Okay, so 4 Methodists from Campwoods joined the United States, served with the United States Navy. Chief Yeoman Alfred Reuben Gledhill served aboard the USS Louisville, a passenger liner that was pressed into service as a troop transfer ship during the war. That was very common. They actually commandeered a lot of the ships on the Hudson, including the Sarah Jenks from here in Ossining. Seaman Second Class Adna Edward Hall, you don't hear that name a lot anymore, Adna, enlisted on July 13th, 1918. He attended Naval Training Camp in Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx, where there was a huge training camp for the Army. His last day at training camp was November 11th, 1918, which also happens to be the last day of World War I, well, an armistice day. So he dodged a bullet on that one. I could find nothing about musician Donald Briggs, sadly, because I would love to know all about musician Donald Briggs. So maybe someday I'll stumble across it in the archives of time. The only woman on this list is Red Cross nurse Naomi Anderson. Naomi Marie Elizabeth Anderson was born in Jersey City, New Jersey in 1894. Her parents, Frank and Matilda Anderson, were born in Sweden. She attended college for 3 years, which was rather unusual for a woman in the early 20th century. It says she was an American Red Cross nurse, but we also found her, she was more than that. In 1916, she enlisted in the Navy Nurse Corps. This made her one of the first women in U.S. history to join the military. She was stationed at Methodist Episcopal Hospital in Brooklyn and then sent to the Naval Hospital in Newport, Rhode Island. She was honorably discharged in 1922 at the age of 28 and got married 2 years later. She had one child, a daughter, and lived in New Jersey all her life before passing away at the age of 90. Sounds like quite a woman.
Yeah.
So yay, Naomi Anderson is my goddess! As the centennial of the end of the beginning of World War I for us approaches in 2018, the end, communities around so it's going to be 100 years since America entered World War I. All right, next year, 1917. Don't film that, I got my dates right. It's 100 years, okay. So as the centennial approaches, communities around the nation are rediscovering, restoring, and rededicating their World War I memorials. In Washington, D.C., an art historian named Mark Levitch has started the World War I Memorial Inventory Project to catalog and document all 10,000 of them. The village of Ossining Memorial in Nelson Park is on this registry, but this one was not. I contacted Levitch and am pleased to announce that he will add the Campwoods World War I Memorial to his website in the future.
Thank you. In the future, but not for this.
Well, once he got back to his desk. He said he's got a little backlog, but he did. But he promised.
We'll check it.
He'll put it on. He will. So why does any of this matter? Why should we care about a memorial to a war that are almost forgotten today, except by Hollywood? War is traumatic for those who serve and the families left behind to worry. These service people came home to marry, have children, have careers, live the rest of their lives, but they carried with them the difficult memories until their death. They may not have been from Ossining, most of them, but they fought for all of us. And as the wars have piled up in the 20th century and now the 21st, our military men and women bear the cumulative pain and hope of a nation. It is up to us to ensure that their service and sacrifice is never forgotten.
Thank you.
Thank you. See, it really needs help, guys, right?
Yeah, it does.
And it's becoming structurally unsound, and so we need to raise the money to at least, I think, do the structural work. You know,
Yes.
It might have to go in phases to at least, I think, support to re-support this. I mean, the ornamental stuff, the eagle, you can get recast at some point, but if it falls down, what's the point?
What's
Yeah.
the point? And
If
this
the
is-
eagle has nothing to stand on.
The eagle has nothing to stand on, yes. And you know, this is a story, you know. Even if we don't raise all the money we need, at least we're raising awareness that this is here.
Yeah, I didn't even know it was here until a few years ago, and I'm like, what the heck is
I
this?
don't know why they put
Yes,
Barbara Howe.
so World War I was a stationary war. People fought in trenches in the same area for months, maybe years at a time. And in the Flanders area of Belgium, the landscape was devastated by bombs, by gunfire, and by chemical warfare. It was the first use of chemical warfare. So nothing grew there. It was really a wasteland. The only thing that would grow up was simple weeds, like the poppy. So John McLean was a Canadian officer. He was a doctor, but he chose to fight as a soldier. And he was also a poet. After he officiated at the funeral service of a good friend of his, he sat down and he wrote a poem that became the reason why the poppy is the symbol of World War I. It's called In Flanders Field. In Flanders Field, the poppies grow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our space. In the sky, the lark, still bravely singing, flies, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Long days ago we lived, felt the dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved. Now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from fallen hands we throw the torch. Be it yours. Hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field.
Very nice.